Today's secular worldview gives the experiential dimension short shrift. Things like value and meaning and spiritual truths are second class, not really real in the secular worldview. That's a mistake. We are a century and a half after Darwin, but we're still having to excavate some of the implications at deep levels of an evolutionary perspective. The religious traditions out of which we in the secular world emerged had certain realities that they gradually captured as they developed over centuries and millennia. In some ways, it's not surprising that if we're only applying the secular perspective of the evolutionary story for 150 years, we'd still be having to do stuff to complete the transformation in our understanding, that it would emerge in only an incomplete form. Frankly, I'm surprised that the secular worldview hasn't come to some of these realizations that are provided by the religious worldview by a different route. But here we are, and what I think is necessary, for one thing, is to recognize that the evolutionary perspective shows the experiential realm to be something that's far more than merely subjective. I mean, there is the subjective dimension of it, but we have some inborn experiential tendencies. And if we can see that, that can be easily shown, but let me just say, if they're inborn, that means that these tendencies were selected for in the unfolding of our species, where those people who had these tendencies were more likely to get their DNA into the future than those that did not. And not just people, but all the way back to as these tendencies first emerged, because a lot of our tendencies in terms of experiencing things in terms of better and worse, for example, are not just a human thing. My cats are certainly in that realm, and I don't know how far down you go where some things are better and some things are worse, and they're experienced. And the experiential dimension is a part of the strategy for survival. The feeling good motivates the creature to do the things that ancestrally prove to be good better than not for getting your DNA into the future. Selection for what proved life-serving. So it's not merely subjective. We're born with a cluster of experiential tendencies. And on my website, betterhumanstory.org, I go into several of them, including spiritual transformative experiences. Start with the fact that there's a inborn capacity for a certain kind of experience that's in the human genome. And it's quite clear that that's the case, and that must mean that there was a process that selected for it. So what's inside us is in some senses a rejection of, not a rejection, a projection of the realities of the world in which we have survived, and in which some things were selected for because they helped life to get into the future. They're life-serving. And what's life-serving is also aligned with the other dimension of the good besides survival is that there is a dimension of experience, which has got to do with some things the creature welcomes as a positive thing and some, on the contrary, are negative. And that dimension is, in fact, how value gets into the universe as a emergent reality. I mean, if you have a universe, cosmos, in which there are no beings whatsoever that experience some things as better and some things as worse, that experiencing some things as mattering, then nothing matters. It makes no sense to say that it's bad or good if it has no registry in any creature's experience. You can put God into there if God says he shows that he's pleased with the light that he's created. It is good, he says. Okay, well then it's something matters. Presumably, that's we later see that when something isn't good, he doesn't like it. So he experiences some things as good and some things as not good, and that's enough to bring value into the universe. But if we don't have that kind of a being in, we have to wait until there are creatures that are around for whom anything matters to get any kind of value. But then there is, in fact, value. A life that is fulfilling is better than a life that is traumatic and painful and wounded. That's just built in to the values that are built into us that become clear in an evolutionary perspective. Because there's an alignment between what feels good and what helps get our DNA into the future. They're all in alignment, though we have created a different environment from the one we evolved in. That creates a lot of complications. But it is important for us to understand that the experiential tendencies that we have in here, to experience things in better and worse, to have the capacity for spiritually transformative experience, to find things interesting, to take pleasure from seeing things that we find beautiful. Those are some of the things that and the sacred space of lovers is another thing that I included in that we are oriented to find fulfillment in things which actually are beautifully aligned with what it has taken through the countless generations for our kind to survive, so that we become essentially a map of some sort projected through the requirements for survival. That is real. That is real. We have it in us, these experiential tendencies, in the same way. We could talk about the ways in which the two are different, but I think most fundamentally, it's just like you can go into any other part of us. There are going to be differences between human noses and human lips, and hands aren't all the same and stuff like that. But there's a human anatomy that variations on a theme in that constitute our individuality, but we have a lot in common. The surgeon who discovers us on the table knows where a lot of stuff is, regardless of which one of us is on the table. So I think that we should conceive of the experiential realm as having with it, in it, as a core, a somewhat undifferentiated, but somewhat also has a real structure, a set of structures to it that are that were rewarded by being selected for the many generations that led before. That these basic structures of maybe having an experience of a kind that feels super real. One comes back from with a sense of spiritual truth that must be honored and kept in mind, and maybe having lives impacted. Well, that to me is confirmation that there is something life-serving that we tap into in a realm of experience that's basic, that we see as a spiritual experience. And that therefore evolution has told us that there is something there that is likely to tell us something we should hear if we tune into it. I mean, I think that those basically follow from the evolutionary evidence that we've got this capacity. The evolutionary perspective says that the spiritual realm, it may be filled with a lot of confusions because of a whole variety of factors. But fundamentally, it's there because that was a place to go to where people would come back and be affected in ways that made it more likely that their DNA would get into the future. That tells us something important. It tells us that the spiritual dimension and the moral dimension are both real, important, and life-serving. Those understandings should be integrated into our secular worldview. The evolutionary perspective doesn't just say that things didn't happen like in Genesis. It said that we got shaped by a process, and that had implications. Just like my Better Human Story at the core is that we departed from the order that process created, and that had certain implications. That's the parable of the tribes version. But this one says that we have access to know things about what is good and what is sacred, that is built into us, and that we would do well to attend to and not diminish by giving second-class status to it, like the contemporary secular worldview tends to do with the moral and spiritual dimensions. Not that it's easy to get to absolute truth about good and what's good and what's not good, or to get to absolute truth about how to understand what's sacred. But there are directions that are built into us to go. That seems pretty clear. And we need to tune in to those, because that is a place from which there are passions to be harnessed that will make us more powerful in seeing that what is good and what is sacred is protected from the destructive forces that our civilization is having to contend with. Thank you. Bye-bye.